Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Zellerbach Hall. My name is Will Smelko. I'm the ASUC president, and it's my pleasure today to introduce our program, Giving Back, Finding the Best Way to Make a Difference. As Cal has just ended Global Outreach Week, just began our UC system-wide Haiti Relief Project, and once again ranks as the leading university in the United States for public service. Mr. Gates' presentation to our campus community and the topic of his remarks could not be more timely or relevant. Mr. Gates is the co-chair of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Along with his wife and co-chair Melinda Gates, they have personally expanded opportunities to the world's most disadvantaged people. Mr. Gates, they have championed the foundation's primary issues: global health, global development, education, and especially ensuring that low-income minority students are prepared for college and have the means to attend. For those to whom much has been given, much is expected. The lives saved and enriched by Bill and Melinda Gates certainly exceed even the exceptionally lofty expectations expected of them. After Mr. Gates' presentation, Executive Vice Chancellor and Provost George Breslauer will join him on the stage for Q&A. Also, if you'd like to submit a question still, ushers will be coming down the aisle with question cards momentarily. With that, ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege and honor to welcome to UC Berkeley, Mr. Bill Gates.
Thank you. Great. Well, thank you. It's great to be here. I dropped out of school myself, and I promised my dad I'd go back. And so I'm working that debt off kind of one day at a time, going back. This is the first time I've gone out and spoken at a college since I retired from Microsoft. Almost 2 years ago, I switched my full-time focus to be the work of the foundation. And that's a lot of fun. And so I'll be talking about something a little different now than in the past. In the past, it was all about the amazing things technology could do, and I still believe strongly in that. In fact, it connects with what I want to talk about today. But the focus right now, I think, is one that fascinates me, and that is, are the brightest minds working on the most important problems? I think the answer is probably not. I think we could do a lot better on it. It's a hard thing to be numeric about. After all, some of the terms aren't exactly precise. Who are these brightest minds? Well, certainly any reasonable definition would have to include anyone who gets to go to one of the top universities. In other words, it includes all of us here. In fact, that group might be the one because of the quality of the education, being selected for talent, being young and open-minded. That might be the very group that getting focused on these important problems is most important of all. So what are the important problems? Well, there are two. Many people would have, I think, different definitions. Certainly the inequities in poor countries, the health issues, the food issues, bad governance, bad sanitation. I think those would make anyone's list. And there'd be a number of problems that are more global in nature. How do we make education systems better? Where even the world's richest country, the United States, is doing a very poor job of that. How do we take this next 50 years of needing to feed people and do that in a way that's environmentally friendly? How do we create the energy that we need in the decades ahead in a way that doesn't create drastic climate change? So I think that would be the basic list. Some people might add one or two, subtract one or two. But when we say important problems, I mean the things that affect literally millions and address inequity that we all feel terrible about. So we want to take all the excitement and energy possible and apply them to these things. And I was thinking about this a few weeks ago when I was with some friends. We were goofing off, and there were two topics that were discussed with incredible energy, incredible excitement, incredible IQ and depth. The first was March Madness. These guys knew the history of this strategy and that strategy, and which coach did this thing, and they were impassioned about different ideas and who would win and who was better, and I just couldn't believe how much they knew. The second thing was they were very knowledgeable about Wall Street. I mean, they understood about mortgage relief and derivative products and various financial reform type things and new salary structures, mortgage market. They understood the Wall Street stuff that was going on. And I could just sort of look at their mind and say, wow, you've got a fairly high percentage devoted to these two topics. And so people were having fun. They were putting their best thoughts into these topics. So I thought, well, how possible is it that we could be having this same intense conversation about how to make a teacher better? Could we be having that same conversation about how to make seeds that would make poor farmers more productive? And I thought, maybe not. We're going to have to work on this. So a lot of talent goes to sports or entertainment very broadly, and even the very best often go off to investing. Even those that do go into science, often it's working on problems like a new baldness drug. And the things going on there, I'm not saying they should be banned. I love movies. I know people who'd be more fun to look at if they had a baldness drug. But if we wanted to shift in the direction of these problems, how could we achieve that? Now, I will say that over the last decade, there has been a shift. There has been an improvement. And as was said in the introduction, Berkeley should be proud of the fact that it's been at the forefront of this. There's many ways to see that. You look at your global health courses and how the popularity of those, and how those have proliferated even in the undergraduate level. You look at the number of science projects going on. You look at the reception that somebody like a Paul Farmer gets, or the awareness of AIDS and malaria broadly in the world. If we think of education, Teach for America, which is a great thing, drawing in the best minds to help out a very poor K through 12 education system. Berkeley had 459 applicants, so that's over 6% of the class actually applied to do something that economically is not that remunerative, and yet it's a very positive thing. So things are trending in a positive direction. If I think of my own case, I wasn't very deliberate about what I chose to work on. I didn't survey the diseases and the needs. I didn't think, okay, which of these would have the best impact. When I was 13 years old, I was lucky enough to get involved with software. I was fanatical about it day and night, and it was great. I could get a sense that I wanted more software, and maybe other people could too, and I wanted it in a form that was cheap and interactive, and that became the personal computer. And so being part of that revolution, it did have a very positive impact. In fact, there are amazing things yet to be done, coupling those advances with the needs of these important problems. But I wish I had been somewhat more aware at a younger age. It was in the 1990s when I started to learn about poor countries and poverty and health, and got drawn in, and that's why those have become the big focus of the foundation. So let me take two of these interesting problems and talk about where we are, why I think they're fun, and what maybe will come out of those things. First, let me talk about childhood death. It's kind of a negative thing. What are the statistics? In the 1990s, I said to myself, do I even know that? in this country, how many die, what do they die of? In other countries, how does that goes on? And I thought, well, people must know these numbers, and there must be this huge focus on the areas where there's still a lot of these deaths. Unfortunately, that's not the case. There are very few people working in these areas, but even that modest group has been able to make progress. So in terms of a report card for the world, are you working on the right things? I think progress, there's not that many metrics that would count, and this would be one of them, maybe even the top of the list. And so I'm going to show one chart in the whole presentation, but it's such a nice chart. I think it's well deserving, and that's this decline in the number of deaths of children under the age of 5. So you go back to 1960, and you see it was over 20 million a year, and you come up to the present, the last measurement, and you see that it's just under 9 million. So that's more than a factor of 2 reduction during a period where actually the number of births rose about 35%. And so it's a substantial reduction in the rate of childhood deaths. And you might say, why? What happened? Well, by and large, the biggest factor of all was not some big fancy hospital, but rather the invention and delivery of a small number of vaccines, about 7 vaccines. That's the largest single factor in what happened there. The measles vaccine alone, the elimination of smallpox alone, each count for getting rid of more than 1 million deaths per year. And so vaccinations are this incredible thing, and yet you find out that in the world of pharmaceutical drug spending and activities, working on the vaccines for these diseases and the complexity of delivery is a tiny, tiny part of the portion that works on them. When you try and take a chart like this and map it, how does it compare in poor countries versus here in the US? One way to look at this is to say, of all the people who were born the year you were born, how quickly are they dying? So if you're the group that was born you're in the United States, how old will you be when 20% of that group has died? The answer in this country is you'll be over 60 years old. Even before you get to 20%, you will have lived a reasonably long period. The answer in the poorest countries in the world today is it's under age 4 by the time you get to 20% of that birth cohort dies. You have infant mortality rates above 200 per 1,000. They're usually quoted per 1,000 in a number of countries. And that, that's because we're not getting them, the vaccines we have, and we're not getting the new vaccines, among other things. But that's where the highest impact would come. So it's still a big problem. I remember the first time I was aware of this was when my wife and I saw an article about a form of diarrhea called Rotavirus that the article said was killing over 500,000 people a year. And I thought, wow, there must be a lot of scientists working on this. Well, soon after that, I met the very few people who were, and I was fairly shocked at that. I thought, okay, that would be different. Now, there is a vaccine for that. It's not being distributed very broadly. The expense, the acceptance in the developing countries, it'll take us 5 to 10 years to get that broadly used. But when it does, it'll take this number here and drop it by another, probably 500,000 or so. So it doesn't take too many of those to get going. We will need a lot of innovation, a lot of scientific thinking about getting prices down. These vaccines have to be kept cold, so how do you do the cold chain? Are there new ways that don't require refrigerators, which require electricity, that's very difficult in these countries? How can we do that? Now, one of the dilemmas that came with this getting involved in global health was the question of what would be the overall effect? Because after all, if you're saving more people, it might seem like common sense, you're increasing the population growth in that area. And in fact, that is a very tough challenge in so many ways. It means that educating and feeding and getting jobs for the people will be more difficult. And it means that whatever your environmental concerns are, whether it's use of energy or anything, that increased population density is the worst thing that works against you. You know, what you want is, in the long run, the total number of people, max, to be minimized, and that the energy per person to be minimized, or whatever activities that caused impact. Well, the phenomenal thing we learned is that as you improve health in a society, very rapidly the birth rate drops. That is, parents want to have a few healthy kids, and so as health improves, they have less children. Hans Rosing has an incredible video about this that talks about the effect, and I highly recommend it. It's a TED speech, 18 minutes that he gave, that goes through this. You know, you have countries with good health and low birth rates, and countries with terrible health and high birth rates, and that's it. There's still some mysteries in this area. The first 30 days of life, about 40% of the kids who die are there, and that one is not as obvious. It's not like malaria or respiratory or diarrheal, where we have very clear vaccine targets. There, we'll need to change behaviors. We need to get more understandings. But there's no doubt that there's a virtuous cycle that can be driven here, which is you improve health with very inexpensive interventions, reduces population growth, and makes all the other problems tractable. In fact, you know, many societies that were once considered developing countries received aid. Countries like Brazil or South Korea, Thailand, Malaysia, went through this virtuous cycle of improved health, and now they're not only self-sufficient, each one of those countries is a donor helping take the modest number of remaining countries, about a third, overwhelmingly in Africa, but some of the large ones in Asia, and helping to create that positive cycle for them. So getting out of this trap, you know, it looks like it will be a possible thing. So overall, it's a very optimistic story, and yet one that has the tiniest fraction of scientific activity and inquiry focused on these childhood deaths. To take another problem area, one that we all are involved in, at least as consumers of, let's take education. Education, whether it's primary, secondary, or university education, are proven as one of the great interventions in a country. If you improve education levels, economic success comes. So after you get the basic health and food needs met, this is one of the things that's important. And of course, the world at large over the last 100 years has raised education levels. Even if you take post-World War II in the United States, the period, say, 1945 to 1975, the number of people going to high school, the number of people going to college, it improved a lot. The quality of the system improved. Ironically, since 1975, by almost any metric, the system has not improved, and by many metrics, it's gotten worse. And that's ironic because it's at a time, if you just take K through 12, where the number of teachers per student has doubled, and the salary of those students relative to the average wage has been increased very substantially, and yet achievement levels, both in absolute have not changed, and relative to other countries, they have gone from being the best to, of a rich country, clearly among the worst of all countries. And so, you know, if there's anything that's about rights and equity, it's education. At the high school level, over a third of the kids drop out. For minorities, it's more than half. College is even, that's not great. Of the kids who go to community college, again, over 30% of those don't finish. If you get assigned to a remedial class, over 50% don't finish, and they spend a lot of time, a lot of discouragement, a lot of loans associated with that. And so we need to improve that. You know, who are the good teachers? How's it being done well? Why do these costs keep going up? University, college costs are rising dramatically. The state of California is Exhibit A in the increasing tuition, which, you know, I understand how the budget math works. It's a tough challenge because other things like medical costs and pension costs are demanding more when the pie's not growing much, and so that tuition goes up. But it means that what used to be free and broadly accessible is getting a bit out of reach. And so you say, well, how could we change? And really in two ways. How do we have better teachers, particularly in that K through 12 system, so that the knowledge is more interesting, kids learn more? And second, how do we take this cost increase that if we take the current trends, the number of people who will get in this country the kind of education you've had, that number will go down in absolute because it's becoming less and less affordable. Well, what could you do? Well, for teacher quality, you could measure who does it well. And this is another one of those fields where the number of people actually doing this work is tiny. And the number of things that are understood and widespread is just unbelievably small. So the room for improvement's incredible. In terms of the cost, well, technology could play a role here. A lot of universities putting courses out for free. You could take the lecture portion and not just have the best from a university, but the best from all universities to select among, and then even take the sort of one-on-one learning pieces, the motivation, the discussion pieces, and use technology to bring those costs down somewhat. You know, the Physics 10 course that Richard Mueller does is fantastic. I get to watch it online. I learn new things. There's amazing courses out there from this university and others. So there's a lot that can be done. So those are just two problems where the attention is still far short of what it could be. And there are many other problems: governance, water, sanitation, savings, and some of the global ones like energy. So we also get this meta problem. How do we draw more people in? Why don't people do it now? Is it the visibility? Is it that they don't see those challenges? They don't have the awareness? Do they not know the success stories? If we take the success stories, that would breed more people coming in, which would breed more success stories. You know, how do we make this an attractive thing? And I don't have the answer to this, but it is something that I challenge you to think about, taking particular problems and drawing talent into those, and the general question of drawing people into these problems, because the trend has been good, but we have a long ways to go. And those of us who've had a great education probably, in a sense, have the strongest responsibility for this. So it might delay the next baldness cure, might delay the next fancy derivative financial product being invented. But if it helps solve some of the big problems, I think that's a good thing. Thank you.
Thanks very much. We've been gathering some questions, and we'll be gathering more, so please don't hesitate to write them down and pass them to the ushers. Here's a question about the evolution of your thinking about government and foreign aid. Has your view of development and the role of foreign aid in the areas you help changed over the years?
Well, foreign aid is another topic that was very obscure to me before I got into the foundation. If you survey the U.S. public, they think that a substantial part of the U.S. government's budget goes to foreign aid. In fact, it's less than 0.5 of 1% is going to foreign aid. And even within that, there's a huge piece of it that's more sort of Cold War funding, where it actually goes to people who you may not like them, but at least they're on your side. Some of it goes to fund acute things like famine, where you're not really saying things will be better afterwards, but at least you save lives, you get people through. Then there's the money, about half of all of it, that actually goes to funding vaccines, funding better agricultural practices. And it's actually, the U.S., compared to other countries, of all the rich countries, except for very few, is the least generous. That is, compared to the Europeans, we're about a fifth if you take a percentage of GDP. That's probably the right metric. There's the really great countries that are at 0.8%, like Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Netherlands. And then there's people like us that are below 0.2% of GDP. And people like to talk about one part of that foreign aid that didn't go well, or was misspent. But in fact, most of it is spent extremely well. You take the whole thing about getting AIDS drugs out in the world. If it wasn't for the U.S., there would be 4 million people who wouldn't be alive. And so that's one where the U.S. actually was at the forefront and is substantially the largest funder. So yes, I'm a big believer in foreign aid generosity. In the next few years, these government budgets, the U.S. and others, are so in deficit that the chance that these things are what's going to get cut, even though they're a tiny part of a big number, they may get reduced instead of growing like they have been. They've been growing. The low point, this is a strange fact, the low point in U.S. generosity was 2000. That is, at the end of the Clinton administration, was the least generous the U.S. has ever been. Then it grew quite substantially by over a factor of 2 up till now. And there was a commitment, a campaign commitment made to double it again. And so we hope that can be fulfilled. But there's a good chance, you look at all the demands and what's gone on, there's a good chance that even maintaining for the next couple of years won't be easy.
As a graduating senior with no job and ever-mounting financial concerns, how can I still make a difference in the topics you spoke of today?
Well, you're probably not going to be too picky about the gigantic salary, so that's good. It means that many of these areas that aren't as remunerative, you can get not as much financially, but the psychic reward. Certainly, I don't minimize in any way the tough challenge people have. It's a tough time to graduate, and I'm sure that creates a lot of turmoil. I do hope that some opportunities open up in these areas. Certainly, if the foreign aid stays high, there's lots of opportunities there. The U.S. USAID, just to take one agency, has such a need for expertise. I mean, they have tons of open positions now. Whether that's a fit for what people want to do in their background, I don't know. But it's certainly a great example. Is it a time in your life where you could go off and go to one of these developing countries and spend a year or two and do some work and get immersed? How would you make that budget work? That's tricky, but there are opportunities like that. So maybe that you can turn that into a positive thing.
You mentioned Teach for America in your talk.
That's right, and what's amazing is, Berkeley was one of the schools with the most applicants. Even there, their capacity to accept people, so Berkeley actually had a fairly high percentage, about 15% of those who applied got in, but it was only 15%, and so we're trying to get the capacity of that program up. I think 69 were accepted, which is phenomenal. And it's been a very catalytic program because it's getting these school districts to think differently because they have talented, committed personnel.
We have a substantive question about your view of certain areas of biotech. And the individual writes, although I personally believe in the promise of biotech, many people question its use in the food system because it is, 1, exploitative of farmers by biotech companies, 2, leads to a loss of genetic diversity, and 3, is ultimately unsustainable in the long run. Do you have a response to these critics?
Yes. The best book on this recently is one called Tomorrow's Table. That it's a fantastic piece of work. I totally recommend it, whether you're pro-GMO, anti-GMO. It'll really bring you up to date on what has the science done, and it'll talk to you about the history of organic farming. What are the true principles of organic farming in terms of helping the farmers, not using insecticides where you don't have to. And it's a case where there's a couple. The wife happens to be a genetic scientist who's done some breakthrough rice work that our foundation helps support. And the husband is a lifelong organic farmer. That's his thing. And they talk about what are the complementary elements and the tensions there. It's definitely worth splitting out 2 different issues. One is what the pricing and intellectual property is going to be for this stuff, and is that appropriate? And the second is are there any long-term negative effects? And although no one's saying you shouldn't have to test and trial this stuff, in fact, the GMO crops that have come out have reduced billions of gallons of use of insecticide. They've helped poor farmers have higher productivity. There have been some pretty substantial benefits. The benefits to come in this area are really quite phenomenal because new techniques like RNA interference should let us front-run diseases that get out of control and really decimate the poor farmers more than anyone because they can't afford the other inputs and all the work that the production farmers are able to do. What our foundation has done is we've gone to the seed companies and we've gotten all the intellectual property from people like Monsanto, DuPont, Bayer to create seeds for Africa. And those companies get no royalties in any way of any kind. They simply donate their scientists to work on seed varieties that combine the traits that they've done for rich world farming, drought resistance being a very, very important one, and get that in for these African farmers. Then we've also funded the regulatory groups in Africa so that each country on a sovereign basis can make a decision, given a crop, what are the risks and what are the benefits? And the benefits, say your corn grows 30% more in a drought year, and that you can prove that there's never been a negative effect, then that's a decision that country should make. So these things certainly are sustainable in the sense that scientific improvements in crops, we have a long ways to go. We've done actually very little. So if you get the pricing right, the safety right, it is the only thing where you can say we're going to reach a 9 billion people population by 2050 or so, and we're going to eat richer diets, the poor, not us. Say we cut our diets in half, that's a rounding error. If they just are getting to basic nutrition levels, we're going to have to do a lot more output. And you can't put that much more land under cultivation. That's a bad thing. There's some that's under cultivation that should not be. So what's the solution? It's productivity. And where are you going to get it? There's only one place to get that productivity, and that's appropriately used, tested, controlled, not too expensive science being applied to this problem. So I have a bias, but the book I'm recommending is less biased than I am.
Final reminder to send your questions to the ushers if you have them. A very large fraction of the population that needs help is dispersed in regions with low connectivity. How does one gain access to those populations and scale up the developmental initiative?
Well, our foundation doesn't take computer access as sort of the greatest need of poor people. It's a need, and it's a very interesting thing. One of our early projects was putting computers into all the libraries in the United States, including down in the South and the Indian reservations. And so all these neighborhoods where kids didn't have machines at home, they could just come into the library and use it. And that was very successful. The number of people coming to the library went up dramatically. It's a good thing. There are many places in the world where that's just too hard, too expensive, not the priority. We've done it in Mexico and Chile and Botswana and Romania and Lithuania. I think now up to like 30 countries. And we are doing it in parts of Vietnam, China, and India. But you don't need personal computer connectivity to deal with childhood deaths. Amazingly, there are lots of cell phones in these countries. And one of the Berkeley projects has to do with taking the cell phone camera, you've probably all seen it, where you can do an attachment that turns it into a microscope. And so for doing diagnosis of like a blood smear for malaria or a sputum smear for tuberculosis, instead of having some complement instrument in the field that doesn't have electricity, you don't know how to operate, you just take this cell phone, take that picture, maybe some local software does some processing, or simply the image, it goes over that cell phone network back to somebody who's got image analysis expertise. And so the foundation is taking that and saying, okay, where can we put that in use? That was done here at Berkeley. It's a fantastic piece of work. So connectivity can help, but the connectivity has to happen for voice-type applications based on a pure commercial thing, and then you can piggyback that. You know, in Kenya, we're very involved in doing savings on the cell phone, a thing called M-Pesa, where it's digital money. The poor people don't have savings accounts because the transaction fees are really terrible, and so the way they have to try and save is very inefficient, and the interest rates they have when they want to do loans. Anyway, so the financial system doesn't work for the poor. And so piggybacking cell phones for that is important. But you know, voice connectivity actually is pretty widespread already, 2G type stuff. And the more powerful stuff, that will come along, but we'll simply take advantage of it rather than fund that ourselves.
We have a couple of questions that are sort of personal. What made you decide to create a philanthropic organization? What moved you to do that? And how do you imagine your life 20 years from now?
Well, fortunately, the challenges that the foundation has picked, you know, the inequities of global health, improving education, these aren't problems that are likely to be completely solved even in a 20-year period. I mean, we should have a malaria vaccine, a TB vaccine, with luck in that time frame, an AIDS vaccine. So a lot of the specific things we will have made immense progress on, but the inequity of health between the rich and the poor will still be pretty substantial. Likewise, education, I think there'll be more that can be done. So, you know, the rest of my life's work, as long as I'm capable, is trying to help the foundation take the resources and give them back in the best way. I wasn't sure exactly when I would do that. I knew that as I got into my 50s or 60s, I would want to shift in this direction. I actually was 52 when I chose to make that change. I'd known for about 20 years that I had the wealth created by my ownership of Microsoft, and that I had a view that giving that to your children is no favor to them or society. And you know, I didn't want to just write a check to the government. So I knew there was something philanthropic that I was going to do. But you know, I was thinking, well, is it to do with science? Is it to do with poor countries? And I was learning about that. And then it was in the 90s when I saw the disease stuff. I said, boy, is it terrible. There's so little work on this. But in a sense, you know, in terms of being a clear thing to work on, it became quite obvious. You know, in that area of our work, if we save lives for less than $2,000 per life, and we have so many things we can do where you save a life for $2,000 per life, that you shouldn't do things that are $20,000, $200,000, $2 million, which the U.S. healthcare system does things that are $2 million, $20 million, you know, and so you're treating that life as being worth more than 10,000 times as much. I mean, society's just doing that, by the way. It trades off how resources are spent. And so, you know, this foundation thing, I'm lucky that it's as interesting as software. And so I won't need a third career.
Right. Could you give us an example of how you ensure sustainability in the projects you start up overseas?
Yeah, you've got to have interventions that are very inexpensive and very practical to deliver. And vaccines are pretty magical. They're not the only thing we do. You know, we do clean water, we do sanitation, savings. But vaccines are a great paradigm because you put in, kind of like software, a lot of money up front to invent it. And then the marginal cost of making it can usually be brought down to be at most a few dollars. You have to work on that piece. And then you piggyback the delivery system that's delivering the other vaccines. And you don't need any doctors. We still have this cold chain thing, but we think we can use super thermoses that are cheap to even avoid that over time. So it's very inexpensive. You know, when you look at healthcare, there's a few things that deliver overwhelming the benefits. Even in this country today, vaccination, it does more than most everything else put together in terms of lengthening life, and yet it's, you know, a few percent of the money that gets spent. So it's very high return. Likewise, a new seed is a pretty spectacular thing, whether you need hybrids or not. Once you get that into a community, then the farmers are using it, and it just keeps on being available. So it's that type of thing that's catalytic, and the marginal costs are very small. You know, if somebody says, well, why don't you start orphanages throughout Africa? That's a great thing, you know, and I hope many people are funding that type of thing, but that's a delivery initiative. Much more for me, I'd say, okay, let's get an AIDS vaccine so you have less orphans. Well, it depends on where you think your relative expertise is. Is it picking scientific groups to do that and getting the trials to be quick and all that, or is it in those end delivery things? So we're pretty picky about the things that have built-in sustainability if they work. That means we take some high-risk things.
The Gates Foundation has been a catalyst that has brought new capital, energy, and attention to global health. What skills and experience do you feel are most important for current students to acquire to become leaders in the future of global health and best make use of the resources and enthusiasm in this area?
Well, to be good in global health, you really do have to be pretty multidisciplinary. I mean, yes, there are some scientists who learn immunology and help invent the vaccines and the adjuvants where they're very focused on that. And that's fantastic. You know, we'll make sure there's more funding for people who do that. That is great work. But once you move away from that to where you start to think about the delivery issues or the getting more people drawn into this, you've got to start to understand the economics of delivery, the social resistance that you get about vaccines, creating demand from the mothers that they really insist that it come in. And understanding government aid issues. You know, how do you convince various governments to do more? How do you convince India to get serious about where their vaccine coverage is terrible? They are the worst in the world, and it counts because over 20% of the birth cohort comes from that one country, primarily up in the north. Then you're going to have to be multidisciplinary. You're going to want to learn the science and know, you know, what vaccines are, what the history of those are. You're going to have to learn some public health stuff. You're going to have to learn a little bit of government and politics and communication skills. So, you know, the foundation is looking for hardcore specialists who understand things, but a lot we're looking for generalists. And the field, I'd say honestly, if you compare in the field of software and you say, hey, let's do a press conference and make some goofy new game seem cool, you know, the number of great marketing people you have is just huge, and everybody knows how to do it. When you take something that should be only about 1 million times easier and say, hey, let's have a press conference about saving children's lives and see if we can get somebody to come, the amount of talent you have to draw on is just far less. And yet, you know, the cause should naturally be more interesting. The amount of creativity that has to be brought to this stuff, so it's not just, oh, you know, hey, we're here to remind you that things are tough in poor countries and you're not doing enough, you know, which kind of pushes people off. There's a lot of these multidisciplinary people who are very effective. And so, you know, you either have to decide, I want to be one of those specialists, which is great, or one of those more generalists. And if you're a generalist, you're not going to be able to take all the courses you need to know. You're just going to have to read a lot of it or have friends who know it or be good at working with people who have those skills.
What are your thoughts about microfinance?
Well, microfinance is an important element in letting poor people improve their condition. It, like any single thing, it's easy to go too far and saying, wow, you know, this is it alone. Because after all, the interest rates involved are quite high because the transaction costs are quite high. And that's why we've got to get digital money, cell phones in, so that you can get these interest rates. The interest rates are often above 20% a year. And in these poor countries, there aren't that many activities that can pay back at that rate. There are some, and it's a very good thing. But that alone, if you don't do savings, if you don't get the health issues right, if you don't get female literacy right, just doing the microfinance alone has a fairly modest effect. So it's a wonderful thing. And you know, Eunice does good work. Abed, who did Barack, does incredible work, and we funded a lot of that. We are doing more funding of savings right now because that has been very underfunded in the field. We're doing a lot of funding of sanitation. That tends not to get funded. So microfinance is great. Bangladesh has super high penetration of microfinance. And so if you want to say to yourself, okay, here's Bangladesh here, and over here next to it you've got West Bengal, a state of India, and you say, okay, is Bangladesh substantially better off, and try and adjust for the different factors? And the answer is somewhat. The effect of the women's microfinance groups has actually been more provable on behavioral issues like getting birth control when they want it, taking care of their children, than it has been on any economic related figure. So you could justify all that work just by getting women together to talk about issues and to be politically active, that when things aren't delivered, they as a group can act. That's a more provable outcome. You compare Pakistan to Bangladesh, same sort of GDP level. The birth rates, the child health practices are dramatically better. And Grameen, BRAC, who are the big microfinance groups, they deserve a substantial part of the credit for that.
How do you propose to solve the leadership deficit in the nonprofit sector? What type of leadership is needed to solve social sector issues?
Well, I think the best leaders are the ones who really learned a lot, and they know the scientists, they like scientists, they hang out with scientists, and they've got the whole resource trade-off picture. Why didn't it work before? How can these things be sustainable? So I think we're going to have to draw into the field expertise from the scientific world, from the business world, where these models really work. If you spend your whole life in the nonprofit world, the idea of how you get a model of what's a failure, what's a success, should the metric be, it's hard. It happens. And there's some amazing people in that sector, but it's not as clear. Failure's not as clear. People don't shut you down when your thing sounds good but does nothing. And a lot of these nonprofit groups could focus on less. Some of them are at such small scale that the overhead that they have is quite large. And so it is a sector that has to be constantly reforming and learning, and it's not that good at not like the private sector. It's saying, okay, this has failed, therefore you free up all the resources and turn them over to others as well. And so people outside the sector kind of coming in with a clean sheet of paper and not having met the nice people involved, saying, okay, you spent this and you got this, and this guy spent this and he got this. It needs a little more of that, which sounds statistical, and it is.
This will be the final question so that we can leave time for Bill to wrap up with a statement before we adjourn. The Gates Foundation is a remarkable phenomenon. Do you see other countries generating similar private philanthropic efforts?
I'm hopeful. In fact, I've been having meetings with some of the people who've done very well in India and the people who've done very well in China. And just talking to them about, hey, the US, fairly uniquely, more than any other country, this is a metric we're good at, has a tradition that a fair portion of the very rich do give back. Not as much as we should. That could be improved as well. If you look at the biggest estates, about 20% of the biggest estates goes to charity. When you ask people in advance what they think that number would be, they guess typically more like 50 or 60%, because there's some that are very visible, and the ones that aren't are not quite as visible. So that 20% should be more like 50 or 60%, I would hope. But in India and China today, it's very, very small, and yet because there's no tradition, it could go in one direction or the other. And the best place, in talking with these people, it's clear the best place to capture a fortune for philanthropy is in the generation that it was first earned. Because if it does start to be passed down, then the person that gets passed to kind of has to say, well, who am I? I got it from my dad. My kid deserves this as much as I did. We define our family by passing money down. That's what we do in this family. And so if you don't get it right at the beginning, if you get this sort of dynastic thinking underway, then it is very difficult. It's not impossible. In fact, there's one in India, which is amazing to me, where he's going to end the dynasty and tell his son, hey, you missed it. But so in terms of the laws, encouraging it, tax laws, and in terms of taking the people who are doing it and make sure that gets visibility and that people are collaborating more, and so it's being done in a good way. The actual capacity to receive donations in China is actually pretty modest. When you have a disaster, yes, a little bit some universities, but they need to build up the so-called NGO, non-governmental organization. That whole sector is very, very limited in China. And so there's some money we need to give, and others can to help get that going. But I would love it if they became like the US, and it was almost an expectation. If you were, say, a billionaire, people would be kind of saying to you, oh, are you one of the ones who's going to committed to give it away, or oh, you're one of the ones who's not? What's that about? So it definitely is an interesting time where it hangs in the balance.
Thank you very much. You wanted to make a final statement?
Yeah, I'll just say one thing. Well, relative to this idea of drawing in the best minds, I hope you'll all think about that. If you have ideas both about the general problem of drawing in the best minds or a particular thing that you're passionate about, and you have ideas about how you think you're going to draw people in or create visibility, I'd love to have you post up in the Foundation's Facebook wall and share the idea there. I'm going to, I'm talking in a few different places, and then I'm going to go through a lot of those and see, some of those that I can give visibility to or we can help collaborate with. And I am very interested in this, how we draw people in and what holds people back. What is it that makes it difficult? So, I'd love to see your ideas.
Great. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for coming out today and for continuing to give back in every aspect of your lives. And go Bears.